Hi everyone and welcome to Book Boop. My name is Rachel and today I will be doing my July wrap up. So I'll be talking about all the books I read in July and what I thought about them. So every month in 2019 I have a theme for my TBRs and July's theme was Alice in Wonderland. So I read two different trilogies that are Alice in Wonderland retellings and I'll be telling you what I think about them. Now, like I do in all my wrap-ups, I have my notebook here that has my trusty notes in it to make sure that I am clear and concise for you. I don't lose my train of thought and I don't blather on all over the place. I want to make sure this is clear and concise for you and that I don't forget anything I want to say. So I'm going to be looking at my notes quite often. So I'll be looking off screen a little bit to see those notes. And also, I'll be trying to give a description of each book as well as I go. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first trilogy that I read was the Splinter trilogy by A.G. Howard. This trilogy follows the descendant of the original Alice Little, which is the Alice that went to Wonderland. And in this particular case, Alice said she went to Wonderland and her family thought she was crazy. Everyone thought she's crazy. And all of her descendants now, ever since Alice on, all the female descendants in the family have kind of turned out to be crazy. So we follow this main character. Her name is Alyssa, I believe, if I'm remembering right. And she's like the great granddaughter of the original Alice. Her own mother is in the insane asylum because her mother can hear voices coming from plants and insects. And then Alyssa starts to also hear voices. She's starting to hear voices and thinks she's becoming crazy as well. And then she ends up finding out that maybe her great-great-great-grandmother wasn't as crazy as she originally thought. And she ends up being whisked away to Wonderland and an adventure ensues. So, Alice in Wonderland retelling is always fun. I love Alice in Wonderland. But I have quite a few thoughts about this series, so let's drop in. First of all, before I get into anything else, let me let you know that I did really enjoy the concept of this story. I really enjoyed the underlying plot. That is what made me keep going in this book. To be honest though, I had a lot of issues with this series. So this was a dark interpretation of Wonderland, definitely. Think like Tim Burton or American McGee's Alice, if you've ever heard of that video game before. So very kind of dark take of Wonderland, which I really enjoyed. This book personally felt a little bit dated to me. When I was reading it, I actually went to go check to see when it was published because it felt very early 2000s, like the description of what the main character was wearing and some of the fads or things that were going on. But this book, I think, was published in 2012, I believe. I think. I'd have to recheck. But I thought it was published maybe in the early 2000s just because of the feel of it. So it felt a little bit dated. This also had... Unfortunately, it felt like Twilight, but for fans of Alice in Wonderland. It has a love triangle in it as well as like a friends to lovers trope too. And I am not a huge fan of love triangles. I'm going to be completely honest. Now, I did really like Twilight when I was younger. When I first read it, I was in my late teens and I really enjoyed it at the time. But now, like when I think back on it and I read them now, I'm like, why did I like this? And that's kind of how I felt about this one. It just kind of felt like a Twilight spinoff, but just for Alice in Wonderland fans. The relationships were very unhealthy and possessive, kind of like Twilight as well. The guys that she was interested in seemed to be very possessive of her, which was really obnoxious, to be perfectly honest. It was very much YA. This whole story, the whole entire trilogy is a very hormone heavy, let me tell you. That's like the guiding thing that guides every single decision that's made. It is so hormone heavy. They're always thinking with their hormones above all else. Honestly, pretty much the majority of the time, the romance really got in the way of the plot. I mean, really got in the way of it. We'd be in the middle of some kind of like action-packed scene. Maybe they're running for their lives and they finally get a second of like being safe and they decide to talk about the relationship, make out, have an argument, like all fueled by hormones. And it was just like, you're still running for your life. This is probably not the best time to be doing this right now. So often the romance just took way too much time. It was way too much over the plot and kind of like blurred the plot out sometimes, which was frustrating because the main plot was actually really, really cool. It took lots of cool twists and turns with the plot, but the romance got in the way so much. And this may just be me because I'm not much of a romance person. I don't really like romance that much in books. I like the plot to be the heaviest part or the main focus and the romance to take a back seat. This often tried to put the romance in the front seat, which was really annoying for me. I got frustrated about that. I probably really would have loved this book and this series as a teen, to be perfectly honest. I think if I read this as a teenager, I would have been obsessed with it. But as a 30-year-old, wasn't loving it. So this is not written for me. This is not for my target audience. It's written for teens. So if you're a teenager or you love like really angsty YA romance, this would probably be the series for you. You would probably really enjoy this. So I'm not saying like it was awful. It just wasn't something for me. So I gave this book 3 stars. It was kind of that middle of the road for me. I kept reading it because I really liked the underlying plot, but I just didn't like the romance. I didn't like it. Okay, so the second book in the series and the third book in the series I borrowed from the library, so I cannot hold this up for you. The second book in the series is called Unhinged, and this entire book definitely had second book syndrome. It was completely filler to me, and honestly, it felt unnecessary. Not much happened in the book, to be perfectly honest, which kind of drove me crazy. It just felt like a bridge between book 1 and book 3. The entire book focused on one main decision and a way too much focus on relationships. So there was a lot of heavy focus on the love triangle in this book. And the entire book, the main character was trying to decide one thing. And that she kept hemming and hawing over that one thing the entire time. And that's what the entire book was. And so it just really felt like filler to me. It felt like it was way too long. It could have been a lot shorter, to be perfectly honest. I wasn't a huge fan of the second book. I really just wanted to get on with the main plot. I wanted to move forward. I wanted to get on with the main plot that I was really honestly enjoying. And the love triangle was exhausting. I was getting so tired of the whole, who do I love? And just the angstiness. It was just too much. It was too much. So the second book, I gave it 3 stars as well, but I kind of thought about it as a 2.5. I really didn't like the second book. There were some characters that were introduced in the second book that I really thought were cool and really honestly creepy. So there were a few characters that were introduced. I was like, ooh, that's really cool. But other than that, that whole book just felt like a complete waste of time, to be perfectly honest. So I moved on to the third book, which is called Ensnared. And by this point, I just wanted the series to be over. I was done, but I was determined to finish it. I really was tempted to DNF, to be perfectly honest, just to not finish it because I was so tired of the romance and the relationships. But mainly, I just wanted to see how the main plot ended. I wanted to see what happened, so I pushed through because I really wanted to read the series, but I just wanted to be over. The third book was more fast-paced and had more interesting plot than the second one, definitely, which was great because the second book felt like a complete waste of time. The romance, of course, still got super in the way of the plot. It was always just interrupting the plot, which was super obnoxious. I struggled with visualizing the odd creatures, possibly because I was trying to read it quickly. So towards the end of the book, it felt like there was a lot of descriptions of these very inventive kind of creatures from Wonderland, which I think I probably would have enjoyed more, except the fact I was honestly trying to rush through the rest of the third book because I just wanted to get it done. And I had trouble visualizing some of the creatures and everything that A.G. Howard was creating. So that was kind of frustrating to me because I was just having trouble visualizing the world that she was creating for me. The final wrap up of the love triangle and romance felt so ridiculous to me. I'm not going to explain what the wrap up was for it because spoilers, but I am so frustrated by how it wrapped up. I told my husband about it because I know he's never going to read the series, not going to care, just to see what he thought about it. And he was like, that's stupid. I'm like, yes, it is. So I was very frustrated with how the romance just wrapped up and finished. I couldn't handle it. That's dumb. Okay. And then there was just, last and not least, there was just so much angst. There was so much angst in this whole series. And I gave the last book, Ensnared, 3 stars. So I would say overall, the whole entire series, probably a 3-star series. Maybe a little less than that, possibly. Because it was just so much angst. It was so YA. It was just dripping in hormones. I just felt wet with hormones afterwards. Ugh. Okay, so let's move on. So I read all of that, and I still had to read a whole nother trilogy of Alice in Wonderland. And after that point, I was a little worried. I was like, I don't know if I feel like Alice in Wonderland anymore. But here we go. So I jumped into the Lookingglass Wars trilogy by Frank Bador. This one, thankfully, was quite different than the Splinter series. I am so happy about that. So in this particular series, we follow Alice, but Alice is actually originally from Wonderland. She is the next heir to the throne for the Queen of Hearts, and when she's a little girl, I think like 6 or 7 years old, her evil aunt Red, who originally was supposed to have the crown, she comes and storms the palace, and Alice and the Mad Hatter run to safety, and Alice escapes into Victorian London to hide from her Aunt Red. And that's kind of where the story first starts, and we get to follow Alice as she grows up in Victorian London. And then when some people from Wonderland come to find her to put her at her rightful place on the throne. That's kind of the general scenario of the entire series. So that's what's going on. All right, so this one, I really enjoyed this version of Wonderland. So much better than the Splinter series. Wonderland still had that feel of whimsy, but also it's a bustling metropolis, futuristic and industrial. So this definitely had more of a futuristic feel, Wonderland. It was more, you had kind of like the main city where the Queen of Hearts is, and it's very futuristic, very industrial, futuristic weapons, and there's these other different cities and things. It just felt very futuristic, which was really cool because normally you don't see that with Wonderland too much. You see usually sort of the enchanted forest and that kind of thing, which that's still a part of it, but it just felt more futuristic, which was really neat. I think that was a cool take. It has a magic system of imagination that can be used for good or evil. And so usually the biggest amount of imagination runs through the kind of Queen of Hearts family, and then kind of random people. Not everyone has the gift of imagination to where they're able to use it, but the Hearts family are the ones that kind of have the strongest imagination, and to where they're able to just conjure up things just out of thin air because they have a strong enough imagination to do so. So that's a really cool concept. And of course, we've got Alice and her mother and father who all use their imaginary gifts for good, and then her Aunt Red, who uses her imagination for evil. And so you can kind of go either way with it. I think it's called white imagination, black imagination for good and bad. But it was a really cool concept. It was really fun. I thought that was a neat kind of magic system in a way. I loved seeing Alice's history, her as a child through her early 20s. So when the very beginning of this book, she is a small child, and then by the time we really kind of get going with the plot when it comes to Wonderland again, she's in her early 20s. And she acts as so, which I like as well. She acts like an adult and an adult woman who's grown up in Victorian London. So it's really cool. I really like that a lot. The fact that we got to see her growing up, and it wasn't just like, okay, she's this little and now all of a sudden now she's this age. It kind of moved up through that and gave us her history of kind of living in Victorian London and not living in her original land of Wonderland. So that was really cool. I enjoyed that a lot. The story honestly is very dark, but it has a lot of humor as well, which I loved. There were portions of this book that felt very young adult, but there were honestly portions that felt kind of middle grade, and not in a bad way. There was just a lot of humor in it as well, which I appreciated because it kind of broke up the darkness of it, because there was a lot of dark stuff that happened in it. It's very fast paced, and it has short chapters, which I really love. I love books that have nice and short chapters. I just think that makes it so much more fun to read, so much more fast paced to read. So I loved how fast paced this was, and the chapters were short, because in the Splinter series, the chapters were not short. So, and they felt even longer because of, yes, anyways. All right, so, and also, I love the illustrations in these. So these actually have illustrations, not through the entire book, but within the middle of the book, and every single one of them has these. So let me just show you a few of them. So they just have these beautiful illustrations of the different characters and beasts and things, and it just gives you such a great visual of what Frank Bador was going for, which I think is really cool. I love that, because of course when you're reading, there are descriptions of what the people look like and things like that, but it's really cool to see exactly what he was thinking about in this. So I gave this book 4 stars. I enjoyed it a lot. It was a lot of fun. It was a great new way of looking at Wonderland. So I appreciated this very much. So the second book in that trilogy is called Seeing Red. And of course we've got Evil Aunt Red here on the front. All right, let's jump into this one. So I enjoyed getting to see other parts of Wonderland and other kingdoms. So in this one, we get to kind of travel around a little bit more, see a little bit more of Wonderland, the different kingdoms that are within Wonderland, and not just the main kingdom of the queendom of the Hart family. So it was kind of cool to see different parts of Wonderland and kind of like just the different areas. There's an interesting dynamic of foes and variety of villains. So it was really cool that in this story, it's not just here's our main protagonist, here's our main antagonist, and that's it. Like there are different elements that are introduced. There are different villains that are introduced, which is really cool. So it's not just like, okay, here's a good guy, here's our bad guy, let's battle it out for 3 books. I thought that was really interesting, that I just kind of threw some other wrenches in there, threw some other characters in there that I wasn't expecting. So that was really, really neat. I don't want to say more than that because of spoilers. I love the fact that the plot is the main focus, which is a complete contrast from the Splinter series. There's a little bit of romance, but it takes a very far back seat compared to the plot, which I loved. I love the fact that the plot was the main focus. That's what we were focusing on in this whole entire story, which I really enjoyed a lot. And the characters are great. I love the character development. I love these characters, but I love the fact that the plot was the main focus. This one also, too, had a little bit of second book syndrome in this trilogy. It was a little all over the place with plot direction, but it was still really enjoyable. So this one felt like it jumped around a lot and felt a little bit like a bridge between books 1 and 3. It wasn't nearly as bad as the second book and Splintered. It didn't feel unnecessary, but it did feel like it was kind of jumping around all over the place, just trying to develop a few characters, trying to develop a few new plot points just to get into book 3. So I didn't enjoy this one as much as book 1, but it was still great, and I gave that one 4 stars as well. So, I feel like I've been talking a lot. All right, so now, the very last book in this series is Arch Enemy. So let's wrap up this series, shall we? All right, so the plot in this one didn't feel as urgent as it should have been. I just didn't feel the urgency in this one to kind of, I don't know, I can't really explain it. It just didn't feel like there was as much at stake as it should have felt. And I could tell that Frank Bador was trying to put a lot at stake in this. And I don't know why I wasn't feeling it, but I just wasn't. So I just didn't feel the intensity that I should have. Honestly, by this point, and I feel bad saying this because this is a good series, I was ready to be done. And I think it's because I had been in the world of Wonderland and Alice in Wonderland the entire month, and it had been a lot, and I was just ready to be done. So I read this one a little bit faster than I probably should have because I just wanted to finish it up. The ending in this, to me, felt very rushed. I always get frustrated when an ending feels super rushed. Like when you have only a few chapters left and you're like, how on earth is this going to wrap up in the amount of time that's left? It kind of felt like that in this book, to be perfectly honest. Some of the chapters felt disconnected to me. The characters were suddenly being in a new location. So there would be times where all of a sudden our character would be in one location and then a few chapters later, okay, now they're here, but there was no explanation to why they were there or how they got there. So that was frustrating to me too. So there was a lot of disconnect for me and just trying to figure out, okay, where are we now? What's going on? So that was kind of frustrating, and that didn't happen in any of the other books in this series. So I'm not sure why that was an element in this. Overall, I really enjoyed this whole series. And this last book was just a little bit of a letdown for me. So I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. So the last book in this trilogy was kind of my least favorite. That partly could have been me just because I was wanting to wrap up the series and get it done and be done with Wonderland stuff. I love Alice in Wonderland so much, but that was a lot of Alice in Wonderland. Oh, that was a lot. So that's what I thought about all those books. So I technically read 7 books in July because I read one other book that was a self-help book, but I read all those books, 2 different trilogies about Alice in Wonderland. Have you ever read any of these books before? Let me know what you thought about them. If you agreed with me, disagreed with me, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Also, what did you read in July? How was your reading month? Was it good? Did you have a good time? Or was it terrible? Let me know. On this side of the screen over here is my logo. If you click on that, you can subscribe to my channel and follow me on my book journey. On this side of the screen over here is a suggestion for another video if you want to watch another one right now. But thank you so much for watching. You rock, and don't forget to keep reading. Bye!